Welcome back to the Hauntological Society. Now, I know it's a place we haven't been in a while, but it's just as spooky as you remember. Because today, we're talking about a place that's so scarred, where the actions are so deep, so scary, that they continue to come back and haunt us to this day. Because today, we're taking a ride on the Pigman's Road.
1, 2, 3, 4.
What's up? I am Erik. Welcome back to the Hauntological Society. I am your ghost host. Today it's just me. Wendy's not able to be with me, so you'll just be stuck listening to my sweet voice for this episode. I just want to say a few things before I get into the story. It has been a while since we recorded. Everybody who's stuck around, I appreciate you being here because we really appreciate you listening. And without you, this podcast would be for nothing. So that being said, it's been a minute. A lot of things have been going on. But we're right back at it. Right back into this spooky. And I just want to let you know that we do have our episodes are being remastered right now by Jeremy Underwood. He has been taking our episodes and helping us get better sound. And so hopefully you guys have been checking out the back catalog and let us know what you think. And the ones that we remastered, I've put his name in the show notes and also a link to his band, Hellen's Bridge. They're a rock band from Western North Carolina. And if you like rock and roll, hard rock, metal, check it out. Hellen's Bridge. I suggest you listen to it. But anyway, we're here to do one thing, and that's to tell scary stories. So I think today we should do that. All right? Because today we have some serious business in New York. We're talking about the Pigman and Pigman's Road. But before we talk about the Pigman, we have to understand the history of the land. The northeastern region of America has always carried a certain energy. Something ancient, something that lingers just beneath the surface. Long before colonists ever set foot on the land, it was home to strong, resilient nations who thrived in a harsh and unforgiving environment. The Iroquois, the Wampanoag, and the Lenape, and the Narragansett, just to name a few, lived, hunted, and built deep spiritual connections to the land. But as history unfolded, colonization forced many of these tribes from their ancestral homes. Even so, echoes of their presence remain. But across New England and the northeastern United States, their languages still live on in their names and towns, rivers and mountains. Quiet reminders of a past that refuses to be erased. Their stories deserve to be remembered, preserved, and passed down through generations. Now, the story I have for you today doesn't directly involve these nations, nor does it take place in New England, just as these stories of the northeastern tribes have endured, carried through generations, despite being pushed from the land. So too do local legends, like Pigman persist, whispered from one curious voice to the next. In a way, both are reflections of place, reminders that land holds memory, and that some stories, whether rooted in history or shadow, refuse to be forgotten. Our story takes us outside of Buffalo, in a small village of Angola. It's here that one of the region's most unsettling local legends have taken root. A story grounded, at least in part, in truth, but twisted and amplified over time. Now, like many legends passed down through generations, it hasn't remained untouched. Instead, it's been shaped, sometimes distorted by whispers, retellings, and the restless curiosity of teenagers looking for a thrill in the dark. What began as something real, something explainable, has slowly evolved into something else entirely. Back before we get to the tale of the Pigman, We have to rewind the story back to a disaster so violent, so tragic, that some believe its echoes still linger. One of the most horrific train derailments in American history. Now, in upstate New York, in the late 1800s, was one of the fastest growing regions in the country. What began as an agricultural hub quickly transformed by booming industrial expansion. With the construction of the Erie Canal, cities like Rochester and Troy experienced explosive population growth. By 1890, it's estimated that Troy alone had grown to over 60,000 people, fueled by manufacturing and industry. With boats moving massive amounts of goods along the canal, railroads just became as essential. Together, they created a powerful network that allowed products to move across the country with unprecedented speed and efficiency, a true game changer in America's rise as an industrial powerhouse. But like any form of travel, progress came with risk. Sometimes, tragedy struck. When the disaster that would later become known as the Angola Horror unfolded, it didn't just shock the nation. It left a scar on the region that would never fully heal. On December 18th, 1867, the Lakeshore Line's Night Express was traveling from Cleveland to Buffalo, and it was running behind schedule, so you can imagine the urgency, the pressure to make up the lost time as the train pushed faster through the dark countryside. But as it approached the bridge over Big Sister Creek, something went terribly wrong. The rear car began to sway, then violently lurch from side to side. In moments, it tore free from the tracks, plunging down into the ravine below, dragging several cars with it as they twisted and crashed down the embankment. What followed was nothing short of a nightmare. Rail safety standards in those days were nowhere near what they are today. Investigators would later determine that the rails at that section were the wrong gauge, creating instability and ultimately led to the derailment. But the true horror came after the crash. The cars were built of wood. They lit with kerosene lamps, and in the dead of a New York winter, they were heated by coal-burning pot-belly stoves. When the cars overturned, it ignited like a bomb. Kerosene spilled, flames erupted, coal scattered and fed the fire. Within seconds, the wreckage became an inferno, engulfing passengers who were trapped inside. Those in the front cars could hear it, the screams, desperate, agonizing cries, echoing through the night as people were burned alive. Witnesses would later say the scream lasted anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes before everything fell silent. Rescue efforts pulled survivors from the wreckage, but when it was over, around 50 people had lost their lives in what had become known as I said before, the Angola Horror. The tragedy led to major changes. Rail companies began moving away from wooden cars, enforcing standardized track gauges, and eventually adopting safer braking systems, most notably the air brakes. The tragedy led to many changes, but on a quiet stretch of road, not far from where that tragedy unfolded, some believe whatever was left behind never truly moved on. Because they say if you drive down Hellen Road at night, past the trees, past the darkness, you might not be alone. Because something is still out there, waiting. 1 mile from where the disaster unfolded lies what the locals now call Holland Road, or as it's more ominously known, the Pigman's Road. There are places in America where the line between truth and legend were thin, where the past lingers, not just in memory but in atmosphere. Holland Road, a quiet stretch in Angola, New York, is one of those places. By day it is unremarkable, a narrow road bordered by trees, shadows pooling around the canopy, the occasional hint of an older world buried just out of sight. But by night, it becomes something else entirely, because it becomes the Pigman's Road. And at the center of that transformation is a man who may never have intended to become a monster, William Derricks. So, to understand Derricks, is to understand how folklore is born, not from pure invention, but from the slow distortion of reality over time. He was, by most accounts, a real person, a resident of Hellen Road. Sometime in the mid-20th century, Derricks lived quietly, perhaps even stubbornly on his land. He was not a public figure. He did not leave behind records that historians can neatly organize or confirm. Instead, what remains are fragments, stories from neighbor to neighbor, from teenager to teenager, till those fragments are hardened into legend. The most consistent thread in these accounts points Derrick as a recluse. He valued his privacy, and more importantly, he defended it. Hellen Road, even decades ago, carried a certain isolation, where people pulled in, especially young people looking for somewhere to gather, somewhere to test the edges of fear. And like so many rural natural properties across America, boundaries are not always respected. Trespassing has become part of the culture. Somewhere in that tension between a man who wanted to be left alone and a generation that refused to leave him alone, the legend began to take shape. For it is said that Derrick used unconventional methods to keep people away. He may have displayed animal remains, pig heads, bones, or scraps around his property. Whether this was a practical act or byproduct of farming and butchering, or a deliberate attempt to intimidate, is impossible to know for certain. But to the eyes of a teenager stumbling through the woods at night, it would have been something else entirely, something grotesque, something unforgettable. For fear does not stay contained, it spreads, it mutates. A story told once becomes a warning. A warning told twice becomes a rumor. And a rumor, repeated enough times, becomes a truth of its own. In the retelling, Derrick's changed. He was no longer just a man. He became the Pigman, a figure that straddled the line between human and animal, between sanity and savagery. The details grew darker with each generation. Some said he murdered trespassers. Others claimed he mounted human heads alongside this animal. Still, others insisted he was something not entirely human at all, a creature lurking beneath the bridge, waiting for those foolish enough to come looking. There is no evidence that William Derrick committed such acts. No confirmed crimes, no missing persons tied to his name. And yet his legend persists, stronger in some ways than documented history. And that persistence reveals something important, not about Derrick himself, but about us, those that seek out the strange sometimes. We have always had a tendency to mythologize the unknown, especially in rural landscapes where darkness feels thicker and silence feels heavier. The human mind fills in the gaps. A strange neighbor becomes a threat becomes a monster, and a monster becomes a story we tell to explain why a place makes us uneasy. But Hellen Road carries another layer, one that deepens the mystery surrounding Derrick's. Because not far from the road lies the site of the Angola train disaster, the catastrophic derailment that we talked about earlier. Though separated by decades, the presence of such tragedy lingers in local consciousness. It gives the land a kind of weight, a sense that something terrible once happened, never truly left. In that context, the story of William Derrick's becomes more than just a tale of a reclusive man. It becomes part of a larger narrative, a convergence of history, fear, and imagination. The Pigman is not just a figure. He's a vessel. He carries the unease of the woods, the memory of tragedy, and a human instinct to create meaning from both. And perhaps that is the most unsettling of all. Not that William Derrick's is a monster, that he didn't need to be. Maybe he was just a man standing at the edge of his property, tired of being watched, tired of being disturbed, doing whatever he could to keep the world at bay. Maybe the real transformation didn't happen to him, but to the people who spoke to him, each retelling pulling him further from reality, shaping him into something that fit the mood of the place better than truth ever could. Because places like Holland Road seem to demand a story. They invite it. The shadows feel incomplete without something moving inside them. The silence feels like it's waiting to be broken by something just out of sight. So we give it a name. We call it the Pigman. And somewhere along the way, William Derricks, whether he knew it or not, became immortal. Not as a man, but as a legend that refuses to stay buried. What makes Holland Road endure is more than just a story. It's a number of reported encounters. Moments where people claim they don't just hear the legend, they experience something. While none of these accounts are scientifically verified, repeated for decades, forming the backbone of the Pigman mythology and the strange phenomenon surrounding the areas, they still persist. One of the most commonly retold encounters from the teenagers in the late 1960s, when the legend began to spread, according to the story, a group parked near the bridge at night when they noticed a figure standing just beyond the reach of their headlights. At first, they assumed it was another person, but the longer they looked, the more it felt, the more wrong it felt. The figure appeared bulky, almost hunched when it moved. It did so in a stiff, unnatural way. One of the teens claimed it had a head that looked like too large for its body. Panic set in quickly. The car was started, and as they sped off, someone in the back seat swore the figure had stepped into the road behind them just before disappearing into the darkness. Another story often told in Western New York circles involves a couple driving down Holland Road sometime in the 80s, but as they approached the bridge, their headlights began to flicker, something they initially blamed on the car. Then, without warning, a shape crossed the road ahead of them. They described it as low to the ground, but broad, not quite on all fours, but not fully upright either. The driver slammed the brakes, but by the time the car stopped, whatever had crossed was gone. The passenger insisted they heard a strange noise, something like a grunt or snort, coming from the woods beside them. More recent accounts tend to focus less on the physical Pigman and more on the atmosphere and unexplained visuals, particularly the appearance of lights or orbs. Visitors walking near the bridge at night have reported seeing small, floating lights drifting up between the trees. These lights are often described as pale white, faintly bluish, moving slowly, silently before vanishing. Some say they hover eye level, while others claim they rise from the ground like embers floating upward. One account for the early 2000s described a group investigating the area with cameras. While reviewing their footage later, they noticed several glowing spheres appearing in the frames when nothing had been visible at the time. In one sequence, a faint orb seemed to move from behind a tree and pass directly in front of the lens, as if aware of the camera's presence. The group reported that during filming, they had all felt an intense sense of unease, like they were being watched from multiple directions. And there are also quieter, more personal encounters. Individuals walking alone have described hearing footsteps behind them, only to turn and find the road empty. Others report unmistakable sensation of being followed, something pacing them just beyond sight, matching their movement step for step in these moments. The legend of the Pigman feels less like a story, more like a presence, something that doesn't need to be seen clearly to be felt. The skeptics often point to natural explanations. The orbs could be insects reflecting light, dust caught in the camera flashes, or distant headlights distorted by trees and fog. The figure on the road could be an animal, deer, wild pigs, or even shadows playing tricks in their eyes. But yet those who experience tend to describe a deeper feeling, one that goes beyond misidentification. A sense that the road itself holds on to something. What's striking is how consistent the themes are across decades. A figure near the bridge, strange movements in the dark, unexplained lights, and the overwhelming feeling of being watched. Whether these are manifestations or imaginations, environmental factors, something we don't fully understand, they've helped transform Holland Road from a quiet stretch of pavement to a place where people go, not just to hear a story, but to see if the story might be true. Some locals and paranormal enthusiasts, and even skeptics, test this truth by trying out a ritual that is said to summon the Pigman himself. To perform this ritual, to summon the Pigman on Holland Road, it's simple, almost deceptively so, which is part of what makes it feel so unsettling. Most versions begin with a group of teenagers driving out to the bridge late at night, usually after midnight when the road is quiet, completely dark. The car is parked and the engine turned off, and then, most importantly, the headlights are shut off, plunging everyone into total darkness. And that silence. Someone will usually say the Pigman's name, sometimes once, sometimes repeatedly, or they'll dare each other to sit and wait without speaking. The idea is that by removing light and sound, you're making yourself visible to whatever might be out there, like announcing your presence to something already watching in the woods. Other variations take it a step further. Some involve getting out of the car and approaching the bridge or tunnel, knocking on it, often 3 times, of course, before stepping back and waiting for a response. But according to the stories, the act is less about calling the Pigman and more about inviting him, as if acknowledging the legend gives it permission to manifest. People who claim to have tried it often describe subtle changes at first, the woods going unnaturally quiet, a sudden feeling of being watched, or faint lights, small, drifting orbs peering between the trees. Whether these experiences are psychological or something more, the ritual itself has become part of the legend, transforming Holland Road from just a haunted place into one where people believe they can actually reach out and touch the unknown. And maybe that's the strangest part of Holland Road. Not just the stories, not just the shadows, not even the figure they call the Pigman, but the way it asks something of you. Because at some point, the legend stops becoming something you hear and becomes something you participate in. An empty road, an empty bridge, headlights off, silence. And then a choice. Do you say the name? Do you knock on the bridge? Do you sit there just a little longer than you should? Maybe nothing happens. Or maybe something shifts. Sound in the trees. A light where there shouldn't be one. That feeling deep in your chest that you are no longer alone. The truth is, we may never know who William Derricks really was. We may never know if the Pigman is a myth, a man, or something that grew out of both. The Holland Road doesn't need answers. It has atmosphere. It has memory. And it has a story that keeps pulling people back, daring them to look a little deeper into the dark. So if you find yourself driving down a road that feels just a little too quiet, if the trees seem a little too close, if the night feels like it's watching you back, just remember, some legends don't chase you. They wait for you to come to them. And on Holland Road, they are still waiting. Hope you enjoyed this tale of the Pigman's Road, the telling of the legend of Western New York. A couple things that come to my mind before I want to let you go. I think it's interesting that they use the bridge as part of the myth, because a bridge symbolizes so much more than just a bridge. It's a connection between two spaces, perhaps the connection between our world and their world, a bridge between two linear spaces. Perhaps that's the metaphor of creating the haunted bridge. And it also ties in with the train wreck that happened before, because once it crossed that bridge and became unsettled, the train splashed and people lost their lives. Perhaps that's all tied together. I don't know for sure. Something else that came to my mind was that when people see the figure just outside of the trees, standing there watching, or when it crossed the road, it was hunched over, not quite standing up, but not quite on all fours. Now, I'm not trying to make other connections here, or am I? But that sounds like Bigfoot activity to me. And what else is strange is that Bigfoot also is known to have orbs show up when Bigfoot is near. So this story has tales of orbs, figures, in the woods, not quite standing up, not quite leaning over, bulky figures, too big to be human, a head that doesn't fit right on its shoulders. I wonder, could it just be a Bigfoot? Does it just so happen that the Bigfoot lives where the Pigman once presided? I don't know. I think it's a strange connection. John Keel would also say that all things are connected. So maybe it is. Don't know. Or maybe, the Pigman himself has turned from past people telling the story until it just created something, became an egregore. It actually existed out of nothing. People created him. Even though William Derricks might have been a real guy, when he passed, his spirit probably didn't linger on until people continued to talk about it and believing it enough that it existed. I don't know. I think it's something to think about when you hear stories like this. I realized over time recently that I just love a good ghost story, and it gets me thinking. And I think about things like that. How is it connected? What does it mean? Is this symbology? Is this something else? And I start connecting those dots, and I begin to think kind of like John Keel would have thought, how everything is connected. It's strange how these paranormal experiences cross over, how you'll get orbs in many different experiences, but they're totally different things. When you see a UFO, sometimes they're described as orbs, or Bigfoot himself has orbs that surround him. What's that? Can Bigfoot project these orbs? Who knows? I've heard people have hauntings in their homes, orbs floating through the house. Is that just energy? I kind of think so, but I don't know. Because I feel like energy would have to manifest somehow. And we know that energy can turn into a ball because we have plasma lighting or ball lighting. So is that just their energy manifested? Can't tell you. But it's just something to think about. It's okay to think about these things in a different way. And another thing I've noticed is I like stories that are weird. So as going forward, I may tell some weird stories, but it's okay because I like it. And you don't have to believe, but maybe just start thinking. Because it's not my job to make you believe. I'm just here to tell you the spooky stories. Thank you once again for coming back and joining on the Hauntological Society. I appreciate you being a member here. I hope you continue to come back and enjoy our stories. And I promise you one thing, I will always have spooky stories to tell because there's no shortage of those. But before I go, I just want to remind you that we do have a Facebook page. Go over there and check us out. We have Instagram, and I have a shop where we have merch. And the shop is linked in all our pages, so you can find us there. Tell all your friends, please rate and review us because once we get the rating is what helps us. So the more we're rated and reviewed, the more that we're put into the algorithm for people to find us and listen. So if you're enjoying the show, please take 2 seconds and just rate and review us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for listening. Once again, welcome back to the Hauntological Society.